Nick is a compliment to what they're doing with DeShaun and making him comfortable, because the way this team becomes who they are to be the team that we need to average 25 points a game is through Deshaun Watson. So you think, what is he best at? Get him in the gun as often as possible. They need to become less outside zone, more tight mid, inside zone, split zone, getting creative with David Njoku, getting creative with 11 personnel with some sort of impactful slot. There are a lot of ways that you can do this, right? You can have go out and trade for a veteran, maybe. Now, some people who study the cap won't like that, and I know we've talked to them recently. Could they go out and trade for a Lockett? Could they go trade for a Cooks? You know, like they need a third.
Yeah, now let's talk about the offense here, because you kind of alluded to it, where there's a little bit more to be concerned about there, because there's more moving parts in that transition, right? And part of me has been trying to ruminate on this, and it's like, hey, how much of this was they just had an offense installed because that's what Jacoby had to run for most of the year, so DeShaun just kind of had to run a modified version of that, and maybe they'll have more time for complete overhaul changes in the offseason. So maybe it was like this kind of piecemeal thing. So it looked piecemealed when DeShaun came in, and that's probably why it didn't look great. Or is this like a more concerning thing, to where this is like, hey, there might be something structural here that just is not clicking between Stefanski and Watson there? Because when I watch it, I'm like, man, they really want him to be on time, but like sometimes Watson will do that, and he's fine doing that. He has the talent to do that. But a lot of the stuff that makes him Watson is like he could roll out, find something, make a big play down there. I think some of the offensive linemen, like, they panic too early in some of their sets, and they hold. And it's like, you don't got to do that. DeShaun could just run out of the way. Like, you know, like, you got to trust your guy there, but it's also like they're probably concerned of him getting hit. There's like this weird adjustment. It felt like nobody was comfortable, I guess is the best term. Watching that offense, it did not feel like anybody was really comfortable doing what they were trying to get done in those 6 weeks. Like, there were moments of comfortability with Nick Chubb. There were moments of comfortability with Deshaun Watson. There were, I think, more moments of comfortability probably with like a Donovan Peoples-Jones more than anybody. But it just didn't feel like anybody was comfortable with what they're being asked to do. What changes do you think need to be made, and what do you think caused that? Do you think that's more or less, we just had to kind of put something together with this season being as weird as it was? Or do you think that was like the plan, if even DeShaun started, that this is what we were going to run from week one, even if Watson was the guy from week one?
That's a good question. And one that I think, again, to my point a minute ago, it's the one I'm paying most. I don't know if concern is the right word. I'm just more intrigued, I guess, is the way to put it. Like, I think people are concerned about the defense. I'm not. I'm more intrigued by what on earth the offense morphs into. So to your question, which is, again, the most fair offseason question, is like, what the hell happened the last 6 games? Like, why? We all thought Deshaun would hit the ground running and just boom, man, like, these guys are going to take off. Like, it's a hand and glove fit. Now, I think a couple things happened. We underestimated 700 days of off time and what that can do, right? What that can do. And I think there's great examples of this. Like, I think there's this preconceived notion you can pick a claw, picks a quarterback up, drops him in a different city and a different coach and a different scheme, and it just works, right? And sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And there's some parts of a game, a player's game, a schematic thing that need to evolve and work itself out. I think this is probably what a lot of people are telling themselves in Denver, right? With Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson doesn't go from being a top 12 quarterback to just being terrible like this quick. So I think that, like, again, I expect Russell Wilson to bounce back and be better next year. Not elite per se, but better. But like, I think Watson, who's way more in his prime, is going to figure it out. But they can't just run it back the same way and it's going to work itself out. Like, I really don't think so. My theory on this is 700 days off was brutal for Deshaun to play. You can go and you can do quarterback sessions. You can do, I got the script and we're running. Nothing like live bullets coming at you, man. And when he struggled the most was with pressure, as any quarterback does. And typical thing here is guys are coming, you're rushing and they're in your face. And then I throw it with pressure in my face and you're going to turn it over. You're going to make mistakes because you haven't seen that. When he was with Houston, he wasn't going out and getting practice reps. he was out there. He was just a body. He was just out there, and then they were sending him home, and like it was really weird. That people forget that not only did he miss, he didn't play that. He wasn't getting any reps. Like he wasn't getting any live bullets. So the first like training camp OTAs, like that's all he got. He got one preseason game, and then he didn't get anything until he came back in November. So I'm not making excuses for the guy. He wasn't good enough. He tells you he wasn't good enough. He wants to be better, but I do think we underestimate 700 days between games is a lot of time, right? It's a lot of time. He came back and played good defenses, Cincy, Baltimore. You're talking about Pittsburgh, who was as good on defense at the end of the year as anybody. Like he was playing good defenses. Yeah. Commanders up front, dangerous. That ice cold frigid game against a good Saints defense. Like that slate of games at the end of the year wasn't like he was playing, the Falcons and the Jets, and the Jets aren't a great example, but it was a tough slate, right?
Yeah, so and it's weird going through like your first 6 games in the last 6 weeks of the season. Because you're not playing Pittsburgh for the first time that year. You're playing Pittsburgh for the second time, but it's the first time for you. You know what I mean? Exactly. Like there's adjustments to be made. And some of the stuff I saw was like, okay, with DeShaun, like there's going to be this conversation about how long he holds onto the ball. I think it's irrelevant in my opinion, because like, he's going to hold on to the ball sometimes. He's going to try to hang on, make some plays. But like, I think that the good's going to outweigh the bad with that. But there are some areas where you're like, okay, he does need to have a quicker release here. One of those is like when he gets like these heavy blitzes, right? Because there were a couple of those in Pittsburgh. One of them was like this one where they had everybody show, and then they had like slid everybody over to the right side, and it was very weird Tomlin-esque like blitz package. And that's one where I was like, he saw that and was like, what? And it kind of threw off his plan. So he ends up just throwing a dump off to like Kareem Hunt. Part of that is just like, hey, in this division, there's a different level of familiarity than there is with other divisions. Like he came from the AFC South, and it was interesting hearing him talk about like, who was your rival in the AFC South? He didn't have one. Right, like we have to try to pick one here, right? Between Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh, they're almost like all 3 equal rivals, except for Pittsburgh is a little bit different historically for the Cleveland Browns. It's a completely different environment, right? Like every week you play a division game. It is a big deal in AFC North, no matter who you're playing, and the adjustments that are made, like, I'm watching the Cincinnati, even Baltimore game, right? You're watching Calais Campbell, and he's doing like these subtle things that he knows that he can do against the Cincinnati Bengal because he's been there so long, where he's doing like this subtle right to left kind of thing against some of their guards, where he's like, okay, I know I can get this guy off of his hips and off of his leverage like that. And it's stuff like that I'm like, okay, that's probably something that he had a hard time adjusting to. 3 division games in that period. I think he won one of them. Yeah, won one of those division games. So not only are you adjusting to a team that's already made a lot of adjustments to you, but the familiarity is so crazy between these 2 teams, and one team's still trying to figure out who they are as if they're in the first 6 weeks. In the last 6 weeks of the season, this is not a recipe for success there. And maybe we didn't really think about that at the beginning of the year because we're just kind of in it, And with the other thing is like, I think there's a level of trust and familiarity you have to have with your own offense in order to get to where you want him to get to, with some of the the bread and butter timing stuff, right? Where he has to just be able to trust it because he's done it. And that's a different level of trust, right? When you're trying to trust something because you've done it versus, hey, trust it because I say it's there. That's 2 different things. So Watson, I thought he was trying to figure that out. Also, like, I think sometimes, like me and you, we probably do a good job of this, I would hope. But like sometimes we know Watson has the potential to be so good that our expectations get like ridiculous of him. And like it's important
he does that to himself too.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm sure he does that to himself.
Because he talks about he needs to be better than 2020. And I would agree with that, right? Like you look at Burrow, you look at what Mahomes is doing. Yeah, like the bar is high in the AFC. Like he does need to get to a higher level. But also it's like, sometimes we talk ourselves so low into it that we're like actually convincing ourselves that he's not that much better than this guy or that guy or this guy. And it's like, even in his bad games, he has like these wow moments where you're like, oh my God, he actually could do that. That's crazy. He can do that. But we're like, it's not enough of them when we're not even used to getting one of those a game. So there is like this adjustment, right? And it was kind of a drastic adjustment because we didn't get week 1 like everybody else. We got dropped them in week 6. and basically we're running a modified version of a new offense like in the middle of the year, and I think that's kind of affected him. It's going to be interesting to see what a full offseason does for him.
Well, you got to think too. You're talking 11 games in. At that point, defenses are very fine-tuned machines by then.
Mm-hmm.
They know who they are. They have all of their blitz package stuff in. They have all of their exotic coverages in. They're all usually pretty good by that point. Not that there's not blown stuff that happens, but you have a pretty good feel for, hey, here's our empty check. Here's our 3x1 check. Here's what we do against orbit, flat, whatever. Like early season stuff, preseason, and then early season games. And you would agree with this, I'm sure. The first 4 weeks are extended preseason these days because there's so little hitting, so little practicing that goes on, real raw practicing that goes on in training camp anymore with the restrictions. The preseason, 3 games instead of 4. You really only get 1 tune-up. So missing the early games when defenses are adjusting, getting ready too, are big problems. So at the end of the year, defenses are very fine-tuned machines. They're doing all their exotic stuff. They got weeks and months of everything under their belt. They know, hey, if it's 2nd and 8 and the Browns are 40-40, they know these tendencies. The Texans game was the most, it's surprisingly enough, Quincy, the Texans game was the most jarring schematic difference than any other game, which I found that to be really peculiar. They didn't do a lot of the RPO stuff after that game that they did in that game that DESHAUN was really comfortable with his last season in Houston. So again, not making excuses for Deshaun Watson. He wasn't good enough. He needed to be better, but you can also understand when you remove emotion from it, why things went the way they did. Now, if this is the same case 7 weeks into this year coming up, we're having a different discussion, but there were so many. He was dealing with, I would imagine his focus on football. And again, it's not to say that someone's picking on him, but with what happened last year in his personal life, the focus on football, I think we could agree, probably wasn't there. Now that all is a little, I think, a lingering thing going on there, but most of it is now behind him. How does he move forward? I just expect a better football player. I don't think we should expect anything less than that. And I'm sure DESHAUN feels the same way. And I talked to you about this before the show. He has said he's staying in Cleveland, the Berea area. That's where I live. Hopefully he's spending every single day with Kevin and adapting this thing. You kind of asked at the beginning, how would I change the offense? Well, I would really look at, again, I talked about this on defense, about curtailing things for your players. This is the Deshaun Watson show, brother. This is every single decision we make on offense is predicated through the filter of how does it work with him. You're paying him $230, and it's not even about much you're paying him, but it's who's your best talent. He's your best talent. He is. Mm-hmm. He's the guy. The quarterback is the locomotive. He's the best talent they have, and from this guy's talent translates to success. He is it. Okay, so I don't want you thinking about this from the perspective of how can they get Nick Chubb more comfortable. Nick's 28 next year, end of the year. He's 28. He's playing this next year at 27. He's about to creep up on the 1,500 carry threshold that is usually, except for some very specific examples, the indicator of downhill slide for running backs. I'm not saying Nick doesn't have 2 or 3 good more years left, but I'm not saying got to get under center, get a fullback, get 2 tights, play 13 personnel, get Nick the ball this way. It is Nick is a compliment to what they're doing with DESHAUN and making him comfortable, because the way this team becomes who they are to be the team that we need to average 25 points a game is through Deshaun Watson. So you think, what is he best at? Get him in the gun as often as possible. They need to become less outside zone, more tight, mid, inside zone, split zone, getting creative with David Njoku, getting creative with 11 personnel with some sort of impactful slot. There are a lot of ways that you can do this, right? You can have go out and trade for a veteran, maybe. Now, some people who study the cap won't like that. And I know we've talked to them recently. Could they go out and trade for a Lockett? Could they go trade for a Cooks? They need a third receiver that is meaningful, who can get open, who can create separation and make plays for his quarterback. Now, that could mean putting Cooper more in the slot and going out and getting a Hopkins that can be an X and do. There's a lot of routes to go here. I'm trying to illuminate draft options. What I don't want the Browns doing is condensing the football field more. How do you condense the football field more? You run too many tight, packed formations. You don't use enough motion. You have heavier personnel on the field all the time, 12s and 13s all the time. People would be like, well, why don't you go get another tight end and a hybrid tight end type and do what the 49ers are doing with Juszczyk and their sort of pseudo, it's 21 personnel, but it's really 12. Well, it's like, okay, when I have Brandon Ayuk and I have Deebo Samuel, I'll consider that, but I don't have that. So I need to create horizontal stretches to create vertical stretches. So I'm looking at the draft at guys who can lift lids, but lift lids in a meaningful way of defenses. Not Anthony Schwartz, but I'm talking guys who can do multiple things, but also run. Again, I'll say it early and I'll say it. My draft crush is Tyler Scott, this young man out of Cincinnati. He was a 4.29 burner. Every touchdown he scored at Cincinnati was of 25 yards or more. Like, that is unheard of. This kid is an under the radar type that I really, really love. I've been posting him on my Twitter feed as much as I can. Young kid, Northeast Ohio kid, Akron area, Summit County, before he went to Cincinnati. But there's many like him. There's Jalen Hyatt, the kid at Tennessee. So they're not like, they don't have to singularly go, and they could get like a Josh Downs, a true slot, who's like this guy's got wiggle. He can do a bunch of different route concepts and create separation. They need to make Watson's life easier. They have enough at tight end. They have enough at two wide receiver positions, but they got to go get one more. And then I think they need to also, as they go more gun run and read option and RPO stuff, create another back opposite of Nick who can catch the football and be a dynamic receiver. The Browns are 28th in receiving yards to running backs this year. Their screen game was pretty putrid. They actually ended up being one of the worst yards. They only had like 280 screen yards this year. So they need a receiving back who can matter, a tight zone runner who can also catch the football and be impactful, because DeShaun likes to use his running backs to throw the football to. And I think that's an element that Kareem was never as good as people wanted him to be at that. So I'm looking at Deuce Vaughn. I'm looking at Tyjae Spears, the kid from Tulane. I'm exploring running backs in the draft in the 5th, 6th, 7th range that they could go out and add as a complement. You still got Jerome Ford, who can do the same things Nick can do to an extent, be that type, and Jerome can catch the football a little bit too. But like, I want a Jerick McKinnon. I want a guy that can be in the backfield and do a bunch of different various route stuff that can create opportunities to keep the sticks moving forward. So that's where my mind is. I'm looking at what Cincinnati's doing from the gun, diverse gun run stuff, while also giving the quarterback a comfortability away from the line of scrimmage, but still having enough play action that is impactful to the second and third levels off of that stuff. So I lean more toward KC, toward Cincy, toward not so much Buffalo, but even I really liked what Jacksonville was doing for Trevor Lawrence and the screen to the wide receiver game, bubbles and slips and various different creative ways to get the ball in the perimeter. Like, the Browns need to find ways to get cheap yards. Everything was too hard for them at the end of the year. So I don't know if I hope they evolve. I think that probably, I have to think, Quincy, what happened at the end of the year last year was, hey, we had 11 games and it's hard to change this thing on the fly and be good at it. We tried it on the fly. DeShaun is like, we're just not where we want him to be. We're going to go back to where everybody else is comfortable, do a lot of the things that we do with Jacoby, under center, play action, and they'll still do some of that sprinkled stuff in. I mean, the hell, they did that in Houston, and he was good enough at it when they used it in moderation. But I want to know what DeShaun's comfortable doing, making everything as comfortable as possible with him. And I don't think that we should take those 6 games and say they've dug themselves a grave and we're going to throw the dirt on and bury them. No, I think they're going to evolve, and they have both, him and Kevin, admitted that. And I think there are some ways in which they can go about this, that there's no reason they can't create cheap yards, and then they just need to find a third receiver who's either a separator in the 1 to 10 to 15 yard range in terms of creative nuances and routes, or a burner that actually matters, who can make defenses have to play more too high to eliminate the congested run fit running lane stuff that they dealt with at the end of the year. So that's where I'm at. I think I'll put pen to paper to this eventually and try to talk through more of like what exactly I mean, but they're cheap. Go look at these 4 teams left. They create advantages for their offense, whether it's quarterback run game with Jalen Hurts and making teams count out the box. Instead of 10, it's 11. You got to account for 11 bodies. You got to account for 2 people that can run. They go some great RPO stuff. San Fran, we know Shanny's one of one. Like, he can do this. He's the most quarterback agnostic system there is. But you, again, have to look at how is he doing that. McCaffrey, Kittle, Debo, Ayuk, they have given him 4 premier weapons to make things dangerous. You look at Cincy, that they have finally figured out how to unlock. But again, Cincy, they get a lot of respect from defenses because they have T. Higgins and Jamar who can beat you at any time. And Tyler Boyd is a perfect complement. And Hayden Hurst, their kind of tight end, is just good enough to be a problem. So teams don't want to play press man. They don't want to get in their face and so they get a lot of open, easy underneath. You want to know how Joe Burrow accounts for 3 missing old linemen? Easy, quick throws. Quick throws. They get the football out. Buffalo missed like 21 tackles. Make guys tackle in space and go. Like, you don't have to throw it downfield. And then if you do want to get up and press Cincy, well, they got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins who can go get the football down the field. So, like, that's an element of it. But again, the Browns don't have that, 2 sheer talents like that. So how else can they create ways to do it? Look at what Philly does. Look at, so I'm looking at, again, the last one's KC. They don't have a great wide receiver group, but they got skills. They got burners. They got Juju is really crafty route runner. But again, what do they have more than anything else? The best quarterback extender put on the planet. Goofy, wonky Patrick Mahomes one-of-one stuff, and then they have the best tight end to ever grace the earth in the receiving game. So, like, that matters. So the Browns have some pieces. They got Cooper. They need to add a speed element. They need to get another wide receiver, but they have Nick, and they have a quarterback who can do some really powerful things. He can do RPO stuff. He can do read option stuff. He can do stuff to help you balance numbers and create cheap yards, and they have to get that going forward. It cannot be 3rd and 3 every damn series. Like, it just can't. They have to create cheap yards and pick up more first downs, so kind of like I'm loose with how I'm saying this, but there's a structure to how I think they can get there that I hope to point out later, but it cannot be the same. And I don't think just because those 6 games were tough means that it's going to be in the future. I would really hope they have a solid plan to make DeShaun the focal point of this thing, and certainly curtail it to what he wants, so he has ownership and protections and audible and different things like that, so he can get into place he's comfortable with, because that's what the best are doing. Patrick Mahomes is Roger, Rui, Rip Liz, right side takes it. Like, listen to these guys. Joe Burrow's got autonomy to move a play off of a play. He's doing it. Like, they need DeShaun to do that stuff too, and he can. So hopefully they get there as a coach and coach, play caller, and quarterback. That's it, man. Because all of this stuff we're talking about, defense getting better and drafting this guy, it all rides on Deshaun Watson. If he's bad, this ain't going anywhere, and we're wasting we're wasting breath. He's got to be the dude that they traded for, the top 5 quarterback from 2020. Like, he's got to be him again. If he's not, this is a gigantic waste of time and a lot of wasted reputation and all that stuff. So, like, they got to find an answer. You got to find an answer, and hopefully that's my biggest concern, is getting there in 23.
Well, I believe we have covered about as much as you can cover about the Browns in late January when they're not playing. Jake, thank you for coming on. Make sure you follow Jake on Twitter, and also check out Jake's stuff at the OBR. Always great stuff whenever he drops an article. But again, I want you, and also check out the podcast too, right? You guys do daily still?
Daily, man. It's a grind, but yeah, we're doing it every day.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm trying to do this, the Cavs channel and everything else. And it's like, oh boy, like I got to get my organization down pat in order to.
Late nights, man.
Yep.
Late nights.
Yep. That's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm like, let me make sure I do this in the time that I'm actually free. But I want to thank you for coming on. It's probably going to be 2 videos split. But again, thank y'all for coming on, watching, coming along this ride. I think a lot of good information's in these 2 videos. Again, have a great day. Have a good night. Thank you, Jake, for coming on.
My pleasure.